I'd looked Robert Blackthorne in the eye countless times across boardrooms, negotiations, and charity galas. Never like this. The spacious CEO office of Blackwood Group, usually a place where I held complete control, suddenly felt suffocating. Across from my desk sat Robert Blackthorne, the founder and CEO of Blackthorne Group. The only man my father, Alexander Blackwood, had ever truly called his equal. Or his rival. For decades, the Blackwood and Blackthorne names had stood on opposite sides of every major business deal. Even after my father passed away 4 years ago, I had inherited that rivalry without hesitation. The media loved it. Investors expected it. Every meeting between our companies was treated like another chapter in an endless war. Neither of us had ever tried to end it. Until 2 months ago. Until one unexpected night changed everything. 2 months earlier? The International Business Convocation in Switzerland had lasted an entire week. Endless conferences. Investor meetings. Corporate dinners. Media interviews. Networking events. By the final evening, I could barely think straight. I wasn't drunk. I wasn't reckless. I was simply exhausted. Wanting a few hours away from cameras and executives, I headed to one of Switzerland's most exclusive private clubs. That was where I saw him. Levi Blackthorne. Robert's son. Unlike his father, Levi looked completely out of place among businessmen twice his age. Instead of discussing stock prices or acquisitions, he stood quietly near the lounge, looking as though he wished he were anywhere else. When our eyes met, neither of us looked away. For once. Neither of us was a Blackwood. Neither of us was a Blackthorne. We were simply two people exhausted by expectations. Our conversation started with something simple. Long week? I had asked. Levi laughed softly. I don't think I've slept more than 3 hours a night. I know that feeling. One conversation became another. We talked about business. About growing up with impossible expectations. About parents who carried entire empires on their shoulders. Hours passed before either of us realized it. By the end of the night, we returned to my hotel suite. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the curtains. I slowly opened my eyes. Levi was already awake. He sat quietly on the edge of the bed, shoulders slumped with exhaustion. When he stood, he moved carefully, clearly uncomfortable after the long night of almost no sleep and emotional exhaustion. Neither of us knew what to say. He gave me one small smile. I should go. I nodded. Neither of us expected to see each other again. I watched him leave my suite, convinced that whatever had happened between us would remain in Switzerland forever. I was wrong. 1 month later, my office door opened without warning. Levi stepped inside. The first thing he did was quietly lock the door behind him. That immediately caught my attention. He walked toward the seating area before lowering himself onto the couch. His head remained lowered. His hands trembled in his lap. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Even though Robert and I had spent years competing against one another, I had never held any resentment toward Levi. If anything, I'd always thought he was far too kind for the ruthless world he had been born into. Seeing him like this made my chest tighten. I assumed Robert had somehow discovered what had happened in Switzerland. Did your father say something to you? Levi slowly shook his head. No. He doesn't know. My brows furrowed. He doesn't know about us? Another quiet shake of his head. Then, almost too softly to hear. I'm pregnant. The words barely reached my ears. What? Levi swallowed. I'm carrying your baby. The room became completely silent. I slowly sat beside him. What did you just say? He repeated himself. I'm pregnant. It's yours. I searched his face. Are you sure? He nodded without hesitation. I've never been with anyone else. I believed him instantly. Levi Blackthorne wasn't someone who would lie about something like this. Especially not with everything that was at stake. Without thinking, I reached over and gently wrapped an arm around his shoulders. Hey, look at me. His eyes slowly met mine. You don't have to be afraid. I'm here. I'm not running away. I'll take responsibility. I paused before asking the question that mattered most. What do you want to do? Levi's lips parted. But no answer came. He looked completely overwhelmed. Terrified. Not of me. Of disappointing his parents. No matter how many times I reassured him, his fear never faded. When he left that day, he promised he'd think about everything. After that, he disappeared. Every call I made ended the same way. I just need more time. And now, a month later, Robert Blackthorne sat across from me once again. Levi sat quietly beside his father. Standing behind them like an immovable wall was Adrian, Blackthorne Group's head of security and Levi's personal bodyguard. His broad shoulders and unreadable expression made it obvious that if this meeting went badly, he would protect Levi without hesitation. No one spoke for nearly a minute. Finally, Robert broke the silence. Why? His voice remained calm. Too calm. My son is 22. He has never involved himself in the rivalry between our families. He has never tried to compete with you. So tell me, why would you do this to him? Only then did I understand. He thought I'd done it intentionally. He believed I'd used Levi as another move in our family's decades-long rivalry. I immediately shook my head. No, that's not what happened. Switzerland wasn't planned. We met. We talked. We connected. What happened that night was a decision we both made. I never imagined we'd be standing here today. I looked toward Levi. Levi. He slowly lifted his head. Did I pressure you that night? Without hesitation, he answered. No. I looked back at Robert. You heard him. I took a slow breath before continuing. I've always considered you my rival. I probably always will. Our companies will keep competing. But Levi, I've never once seen him as part of that rivalry. I would never use him to hurt you. And now that this has happened, I'll take responsibility. For him. And for our child. Silence filled the office again. Robert studied me for what felt like forever. Then he finally nodded. I respected Alexander Blackwood. He was one of the greatest businessmen I ever competed against. His eyes never left mine. And over these past 4 years, you've earned that same respect. If you're sincere, then keep your word. Take care of my son. He slowly stood. So will I. Levi followed him. As they turned toward the door, I spoke. Robert. He stopped. May I speak with Levi alone? Before Robert could answer, Adrian's deep voice cut through the room. No. Levi gently looked up. It's all right. I'd like to talk to him. Robert glanced between the two of us before giving a single nod. 5 minutes. He and Adrian stepped outside, closing the office door behind them. The silence returned. I walked over before kneeling in front of Levi. He still refused to meet my eyes. I gently took his hands. They're shaking. He remained silent. Why are you so scared? Did someone say something to you? A tiny shake of his head. No. Then tell me. What are you afraid of? Again. No answer. I didn't push. Instead, I gently wrapped my arms around him. After a long moment, I rested a soft kiss against his forehead. Levi, I don't hate you. None of this is your fault. You don't have to carry it alone anymore. I'm going to be here. For every appointment. For every difficult day. For every decision. If you're scared, call me. If you need me, call me. You don't have to face any of this by yourself. Levi's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. For the first time since walking into my office, some of the fear in them eased. He still couldn't find the words. So instead, he simply nodded. Hey everyone. This version of the story has been edited to comply with YouTube's community guidelines. If you'd like to experience the full uncut and uncensored version, be sure to check out my Patreon, where part 2 of this story will be uploaded soon. You can visit my Patreon by simply scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the link in my profile. Thank you so much for watching. I'd barely finished my morning meeting when my phone vibrated. A message from Levi. The doctor said today's appointment is at 11. A second message followed a few seconds later. If you're still coming. I smiled before replying. Already on my way. The hospital lobby was already crowded when I arrived. Levi stood near the reception desk. Beside him, as expected, was Adrian. The giant alpha crossed his arms the moment he saw me approaching. His expression immediately darkened. You made it, Levi said quietly. I said I would. Before I could walk any closer, Adrian stepped between us. His broad shoulders blocked my path completely. You'll keep your distance. I raised an eyebrow. I thought we already settled this. We didn't. His voice remained cold. I'm only tolerating your presence because Chairman Blackthorne approved it. Levi sighed. Adrian. I'm okay. Adrian looked at him before reluctantly stepping aside. For now. I couldn't help smiling. I think he's starting to like me. I don't. The answer came instantly. Levi lowered his head, trying, and failing, to hide a small laugh. For the first time in days, I heard him laugh. Even Adrian's expression softened for a split second before returning to its usual seriousness. The examination went smoothly. After several routine questions, the doctor applied the gel before moving the ultrasound probe. A heartbeat echoed through the room. Strong. Healthy. I found myself squeezing Levi's hand without even realizing it. The doctor smiled. The pregnancy is progressing well. Relief washed over me. Then, the doctor tilted the screen slightly. I frowned. Is something wrong? The doctor chuckled. Not at all. You two just have a surprise waiting for you. He pointed toward the monitor. There. And there. I looked closer. What? The doctor smiled wider. Congratulations. You're expecting twins. Everything around me became quiet. Twins? I slowly turned toward Levi. I couldn't stop smiling. A laugh escaped my lips. Did you hear that? We're having twins. For the first time in weeks, I felt genuinely happy. I expected Levi to look at me the same way. Instead, he simply stared at the monitor. His fingers instinctively rested over his stomach. His face remained quiet. Almost empty. The bright smile I remembered from Switzerland. The smile that had stayed in my memories ever since that night. It wasn't there anymore. The realization hurt more than I expected. After the appointment, Adrian was already reaching for the car keys. We're going home. I have another plan, I interrupted. Both of them looked at me. I'm taking Levi to lunch. Adrian answered before Levi could. No. I'm coming. I smiled politely. I wanted some time alone with him. Too bad. I'll be there. I don't trust you. His blunt honesty almost made me laugh. I looked past Adrian and met Levi's eyes. What do you think? Would you like to come with me? Levi hesitated for a moment before giving a small nod. I'd like that. I looked back at Adrian with a satisfied smile. You heard him. Before Adrian could object again, I opened the passenger door of my car. Levi quietly climbed inside. I gently closed the door behind him. Adrian stared at me for several long seconds. Finally, he walked over until we stood face to face. I want young master back. His voice was calm. But don't misunderstand my tone. I want him home. Safe. And smiling. His gaze hardened. If he comes back crying because of you? He leaned in slightly. I don't care whose company you own. I'll make you regret it. I nodded once. Fair enough. Adrian looked at Levi one last time before stepping back. I'll be waiting at the mansion. The drive began in silence. After several minutes, curiosity finally won. Can I ask you something? Levi turned toward me. Why is Adrian so protective? That question earned me another tiny smile. This one lasted longer. My parents were always traveling. Business kept them away most of the time. So Adrian, and his wife, Jessie, they practically raised me. Jessie was my nanny. And Adrian. Levi laughed softly. He spoiled me more than anyone. He taught me how to ride a bicycle. He attended my school events. He was there whenever my parents couldn't be. So, he worries more than he probably should. I nodded. That explains everything. The way he looks at me. Levi giggled. He probably thinks you're a villain. I was thinking something similar. That earned me another laugh. It wasn't loud. But hearing it felt like a victory. Unfortunately, lunch never happened. Every restaurant we passed. Levi quietly shook his head. I don't think I can eat. His appetite had disappeared again. Instead of insisting, I drove toward the riverside. The afternoon sun reflected across the calm water as we found an empty bench overlooking the river. People walked past us. Boats drifted lazily downstream. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. It was peaceful. Finally, I broke the silence. If you didn't want lunch, why agree to come with me? Levi continued watching the water. After a while, he answered. Because I wanted to be with you. He smiled faintly. And I wasn't ready to go home. For a moment, I simply looked at him. Then I smiled. No clever reply. No teasing. Just a quiet smile. Somehow, that simple sentence was enough. We spent the next few hours talking about everything except business. Except the rivalry. Except the pregnancy. We talked about favorite movies. Childhood memories. Travel. Music. For a little while. We were just two ordinary people. Later, after much convincing, I finally managed to get Levi to eat a small bowl of soup and a sandwich from a quiet cafe near the river. It wasn't much. But seeing him finish even a little eased my mind. By the time we reached Blackthorne Mansion, the clock on my dashboard read just after 7. I parked near the entrance. I'll see you soon, I said. Levi nodded. Thank you. The moment he stepped out of the car. Levi. The mansion doors flew open. His mother hurried down the front steps, panic written all over her face. She immediately wrapped him in a tight embrace before kissing his forehead again and again. Oh, thank goodness. Why weren't you answering your phone? I've been calling you all afternoon. Levi looked away. My phone died. I remained silent. Because I knew it wasn't true. I'd watched him switch it off himself shortly after we left the hospital. He simply hadn't wanted to answer anyone. Mrs. Blackthorne finally noticed me standing beside my car. Her relieved expression disappeared. "The next time you want to take my son somewhere, you'll ask us first." Her protective instinct was understandable, but the accusation in her voice still stung. I met her gaze calmly. "Mrs. Blackthorne, I'm the father of the children your son is carrying. I would never do anything to harm him. So I'd appreciate it if you didn't speak to me as though I were someone he'd need protection from." Silence settled over the courtyard. Levi looked between us nervously. I didn't want to make things harder for him, so I simply looked at him instead. "Get some rest. And don't skip your meals tomorrow." A tiny smile appeared on his face. "I won't." I gave him one last nod before getting back into my car. As I drove away, I couldn't deny that Mrs. Blackthorne's words had left a bitter taste in my mouth. But every time that irritation resurfaced, another memory replaced it. Levi laughing in the car. His shy smile by the river. The quiet way he'd admitted, "I just wanted to spend time with you." Without realizing it, I smiled to myself. If spending one afternoon together had been enough to bring that smile back to his face, then every misunderstanding, every glare from Adrian, and every harsh word I'd received that day had been worth it. After that day, looking after Levi quietly became part of my life. Every morning, before I even got out of bed, the first thing I did was send him a message. "Good morning. Did you sleep well? Don't forget breakfast." It became such a habit that on the rare mornings I woke up late, I'd instinctively reach for my phone before doing anything else. Every night was the same. No matter how exhausted I was after work, no matter how many meetings had filled my day, before going to sleep, there would always be one last message. "Good night. Take your medicine. Sleep well." At first, Levi only replied with a few words. "Good morning. I'm okay. Good night." But as the days passed, those short replies slowly became conversations. He began telling me about his day. About how the babies had made him feel sick that morning. About how he hadn't been able to sleep. About the books he was reading to pass the time. Without realizing it, we had started talking every single day. My life outside those conversations hadn't changed. I was still the CEO of Blackwood Group. Business parties, investor dinners, luxury clubs, social gatherings. They were all still there. For years, I'd never thought twice about attending them. Sometimes I'd stay out until dawn. Sometimes I'd spend the evening entertaining clients or talking with people who wanted something from me. That had simply become my normal. But now, everything felt different. More than once, I'd be standing in the middle of a luxurious party, surrounded by music, expensive drinks, and laughter. Yet my thoughts would drift somewhere else. To Levi. I'd wonder if he'd managed to eat anything that day. If the nausea had become worse. If he'd remembered to take his vitamins. If he was sleeping peacefully. Or sitting alone in that enormous mansion. The thought always left an uncomfortable feeling in my chest. One night, while everyone around me celebrated another successful business deal, I looked down at the untouched glass in my hand. For the first time, I realized I didn't want to be there. Not anymore. I quietly set the drink aside and left before the party had even ended. After that, I stopped going to clubs altogether. The late-night parties became less frequent. Then they disappeared entirely. People around me assumed I'd become more serious after learning I was going to be a father. Maybe they were right. Or maybe I simply couldn't enjoy those things anymore knowing Levi was at home, struggling through each day while carrying our children. With Robert and Mrs. Blackthorne's permission, I began taking Levi out every few days. At first, they were reluctant. Especially Adrian. He still watched me like a hawk every single time I arrived at Blackthorne Mansion. His expression hadn't softened in the slightest. If anything, he looked even more protective now. But as long as Levi wanted to go, they eventually allowed it. The riverside quickly became our place. It wasn't crowded. There were no reporters. No businessmen. No expectations. Just the sound of flowing water and the cool afternoon breeze. Sometimes we'd buy coffee. Other times we'd simply sit together for hours. Levi gradually began talking more. About his childhood. About university. About how lonely it had felt growing up in such a large mansion while his parents traveled around the world building the Blackthorne empire. He wasn't angry with them. He never blamed them. He simply missed them. Listening to him made me understand him better. Every time he shared another piece of himself, I found myself wanting to know even more. One thing never changed. Levi still struggled to eat. So every time I picked him up, I'd bring something different. Fresh fruit. His favorite sandwiches. Warm soup. Desserts from the bakery he'd once mentioned liking. The moment he saw the paper bags in my hands, he'd sigh dramatically. "You know, My mother would probably faint if she saw all this. I laughed. That strict? He nodded. Ever since she found out about the babies. Every meal has become some healthy pregnancy recipe. He pulled a face that made me laugh. I swear if she gives me steamed vegetables one more time, I might actually cry. So that's why you eat more with me? Levi nodded immediately. Because your food actually has flavor. And? He smiled shyly. I can complain while eating it. That made both of us laugh. Watching him finish an entire meal, even if it was something small, always gave me an odd sense of satisfaction. At least I knew he wasn't skipping meals. At least for those few hours. He was eating properly. Weeks slowly turned into a routine. Morning texts. Evening calls. Hospital appointments. Afternoons by the river. Shared meals. Long conversations. Without realizing it, Levi had quietly become the person I looked forward to seeing the most. Yet, no matter how much time we spent together, no matter how often I managed to make him smile, there was still something missing. Whenever he thought I wasn't looking, that smile would fade. His eyes would become distant. Heavy. Like someone carrying a burden too painful to put into words. It happened every single time. I'd see the cheerful Levi for a few minutes. Then watch that invisible sadness return. I never asked him why. Not because I didn't want to know. But because I knew he'd tell me when he was ready. Until then, I'd keep showing up. I'd keep texting him every morning. I'd keep taking him to our favorite spot by the river. I'd keep bringing him food he'd actually enjoy eating. And I'd keep trying. Because no matter how long it took, I wanted to see the Levi I had met in Switzerland smile again. The genuine smile that had stayed in my memories ever since that first conversation. Even if it took months. Even if it took years. I wasn't giving up on him. Days passed faster than I had expected. Our routine had become almost second nature. Morning texts. Evening phone calls. Afternoons by the riverside. Hospital appointments. For a while, I had convinced myself everything was slowly getting better. Until the 3-month checkup. The doctor carefully reviewed every report before examining Levi. The longer she remained silent, the heavier the room became. When the examination was over, she finally looked at us with a serious expression. She explained that because Levi was carrying twins, the pregnancy had become far more complicated than they had initially expected. His body was under immense strain, and if we weren't careful, both he and the babies could face unnecessary risks. From now on, he would need constant care, proper nutrition, plenty of rest, and someone beside him almost all the time. Then she asked us a simple question. Were we living together? When I answered no, she gently suggested that we should. She explained that Levi needed stability and support every day. Having me nearby would make it much easier to monitor his condition, respond quickly if anything happened, and ensure he wasn't facing everything alone. The room fell quiet. Levi lowered his eyes without saying a word. After leaving the hospital, none of us spoke for several minutes. Adrian quietly walked behind us, carrying Levi's medical file. For once, even he remained silent. I finally looked at Levi. What do you think? If you don't want this, we don't have to. Levi slowly looked up at me. After a long pause, he gave a small nod. I'll go. His voice was barely above a whisper. But hearing those 2 words was enough. I smiled softly. Then let's talk to your parents. This time, Adrian didn't object. He simply walked beside us in complete silence. That evening, I went to Blackthorne Mansion with Levi. Robert and Mrs. Blackthorne were already waiting in the living room. They had already received the doctor's report. Before I could explain everything, Robert quietly nodded. We know. I took a deep breath. I'd like Levi to stay with me. Mrs. Blackthorne refused almost immediately. No. If Levi needs extra care, then you can stay here. She looked directly at me. I still don't trust my son living under your roof. Robert remained silent before looking toward me. Then perhaps you should move into Blackthorne Mansion instead. I respectfully shook my head. I can't do that. But I also won't take Levi to the Blackwood estate. I'll take him to my penthouse. It's much closer to the hospital. I've already arranged everything he'll need. There'll be staff 24 hours a day, and I'll make sure he receives the best care possible. Mrs. Blackthorne was still unwilling to agree. She opened her mouth to refuse again. Before she could, Levi spoke. I want to go. Everyone turned toward him. His mother immediately protested. Levi. Robert gently stopped her. He looked at his son for a long moment before turning toward me. My son needs proper care. If he has chosen to stay with you, I'll trust you. He walked over before placing a hand on my shoulder. Take care of him. I will. I promise. While Levi packed a few of his belongings, another woman entered the room. She wore a gentle smile that immediately softened the atmosphere. Levi smiled the moment he saw her. "This is Jessie. My nanny." He laughed softly. "She's practically my second mother." Unlike Adrian, Jessie welcomed me warmly. She thanked me for looking after Levi over the past few weeks before gently reminding me that he had always been physically delicate. Now, carrying twins and dealing with a complicated pregnancy, he would need even more patience and care than before. I promised her I would take care of him. She smiled and quietly thanked me. Outside, Mrs. Blackthorne hugged Levi tightly. She adjusted his jacket, reminded him to eat properly, take his medicine, and call home every day. By the time she finally let him go, tears had already filled her eyes. Robert embraced his son before quietly stepping back. Adrian stood nearby with his hands behind his back. For the first time since we'd met, he didn't glare at me. Instead, he simply couldn't bring himself to watch Levi leave. As Levi climbed into my car, I looked back toward the mansion. Mrs. Blackthorne was wiping away her tears while Jessie gently comforted her. Robert stood silently beside them. And Adrian still hadn't looked our way. For a brief moment, it felt less like I was taking Levi home with me, and more like I was taking someone's precious son away from the only home he had ever known. Moving into the penthouse was supposed to make life quieter. At least, that was what I had hoped. The hope lasted exactly one night. The following morning, I walked out of my bedroom, still loosening the cuffs of my shirt, only to stop in the hallway. The usually quiet living room was anything but quiet. Robert Blackthorne sat comfortably with a newspaper in hand, looking as though he had been there for hours. Jessie was arranging fresh flowers she'd brought from the mansion, humming softly to herself. Mrs. Blackthorne had completely taken over my dining table, lining it with neatly packed containers of homemade food. And Adrian had somehow made himself comfortable on my couch, sipping coffee with the calm confidence of someone who apparently owned the place. For a long moment, I simply stood there. No one looked surprised to see me. If anything, they looked surprised that I had taken so long to wake up. Mrs. Blackthorne noticed me first. She smiled politely before gesturing toward the dining table. "Breakfast is ready." It wasn't a request. It sounded more like an instruction. I walked over, curious to see what she'd prepared. Container after container covered the table. Everything looked perfectly cooked. Perfectly healthy. Steamed vegetables. Boiled fish. Plain chicken. Rice porridge. Freshly prepared soup with barely any seasoning. I couldn't stop the corner of my lips from lifting. Suddenly, everything made sense. I'd spent weeks wondering why Levi struggled so much with meals. Now I knew. Mrs. Blackthorne loved her son enough to research every healthy recipe she could find. Unfortunately, she seemed to believe healthy and flavorful couldn't exist in the same sentence. I glanced toward Levi. He sat quietly beside Jessie, slowly eating his breakfast with the determination of someone completing an important task rather than enjoying a meal. Every bite looked like hard work. When he caught me looking, I quickly looked away before my smile became too obvious. Jessie noticed anyway. She covered her own smile with her teacup. Even Robert lowered his newspaper just enough to hide the faint amusement in his eyes. Only Adrian remained completely expressionless. Breakfast passed peacefully. Mrs. Blackthorne reminded Levi to finish everything on his plate. Jessie quietly slipped a few pieces of fruit onto it whenever she thought no one was watching. Robert occasionally asked about upcoming medical appointments. Adrian didn't say much at all. He simply observed, as if making sure Levi truly was being looked after. It wasn't until nearly noon that the Blackthorne family finally prepared to leave. Mrs. Blackthorne walked through the kitchen one last time, checking every cupboard and every container she'd left behind. Jessie reminded Levi to call if he needed anything. Robert gave me a brief nod before quietly thanking me for opening my home. Even Adrian paused at the front door. He didn't glare this time. He simply gave me a long look before leaving without a word. The apartment suddenly felt much larger after the elevator doors closed behind them. Silence returned. Levi let out a quiet sigh before leaning back against his chair. For the first time that morning, he looked relaxed. I looked at the mountain of neatly packed meals covering half my kitchen. Then I looked at him. "I think I know why you've been avoiding breakfast." A sheepish smile spread across his face. He lowered his head, clearly trying not to laugh. I called my chef into the kitchen. Rather than replacing the meals Mrs. Blackthorne had lovingly prepared, we worked around them. The ingredients remained just as nutritious. The recipes stayed within the doctor's recommendations. Only the presentation changed. Fresh herbs. Light seasoning. Warm homemade bread. A colorful fruit platter. Soup that actually smelled inviting. Nothing unhealthy. Just, enjoyable. When lunch was finally served, Levi stared at the table for a moment before looking back at me. His eyes held genuine surprise. He picked up his fork and cautiously tasted the first bite. Then another. And another. Before long, his plate was nearly empty. Watching him eat without hesitation brought an unexpected sense of relief. It wasn't about proving anything. It wasn't about whose cooking was better. It was simply comforting to see him enjoying a meal instead of forcing himself through one. As the afternoon sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I realized something. The penthouse still didn't feel like home. Not yet. But with Levi sitting across the table, quietly finishing his lunch, it felt a little less empty than it had before. I hadn't realized when living with Levi stopped feeling temporary. At first, I kept telling myself it was only for a little while. Only until the pregnancy became more stable. Only until the doctors were no longer worried. Only until he was well enough to return to Blackthorne Mansion without everyone fearing something might happen. That was the plan. Or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. But somewhere between our quiet breakfasts, the evening walks by the river, the endless cups of tea, and the nights spent talking about everything except business, my penthouse quietly stopped feeling like a place where I was hosting a guest. It started feeling like home. And somehow, that frightened me more than any board meeting ever had. Without thinking about it, I began looking for him the moment I came home from work. Sometimes I'd find him curled up by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a book resting in his lap as the afternoon sunlight spilled across the room. Sometimes he'd be asleep on the sofa, a blanket half slipping onto the floor while the television played quietly in the background. Other times I'd hear him in the kitchen, passionately arguing with my chef over whether soup could still be healthy if it actually tasted good. Those little moments, the ordinary ones, did something to me. I smiled more. I slept better. I stopped staying late at the office just because I could. For the first time in years, I wanted to go home. Not everyone was pleased about that. The board noticed first. Apparently, when the CEO of Blackwood Group starts leaving business dinners early, declining invitations to exclusive clubs, and spending nearly every free moment with the heir of the Blackthorne family, people begin to talk. Some directors called it a distraction. Others quietly questioned my judgment. One even suggested I was allowing personal emotions to cloud my decisions. My stepmother was far less subtle. She accused me of becoming sentimental. She reminded me that a Blackwood should never allow personal feelings to interfere with business. She warned me that I was risking everything my father had spent his life building. I listened. I let everyone finish speaking. Then I left the office and went home to Levi. For the first time in my life, I truly didn't care what anyone else thought. If loving and protecting him made me a weaker businessman, then perhaps I no longer wanted to be the kind of businessman I'd spent years becoming. I'd already won enough battles. I was tired of losing the things that actually mattered. One rainy afternoon, the city disappeared behind a curtain of gray. Raindrops slid slowly down the penthouse windows, blurring the skyline into nothing more than shifting shadows. The apartment was unusually quiet. Levi sat near the window with both hands wrapped around a mug of warm tea. He wasn't reading. He wasn't watching television. He was simply staring at the rain, lost somewhere far away. I'd noticed it for weeks. No matter how many people surrounded him, no matter how much everyone tried to make him smile, there was always a part of him that remained unreachable. I quietly walked over and sat beside him. Neither of us spoke. We simply listened to the rain. After a long while, I finally broke the silence. "Why do you still look so scared?" He didn't answer. His fingers tightened slightly around the mug. "Your parents are trying. Jesse worries about you every single day. Adrian looks ready to fight anyone who even makes you frown." I smiled faintly. "And I'm here." I hesitated, then asked the question that had been haunting me for weeks. "So why? Do you still look like you're waiting for something terrible to happen?" Silence. Long enough that I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, in a voice barely louder than the rain, he whispered, "Because I don't want to disappoint anyone." My chest tightened. Especially my dad. I stayed quiet. Levi took a slow breath without taking his eyes off the rain. "When I was little, I overheard my parents talking one night." He smiled sadly. "They didn't know I was awake. My dad was talking about you." I frowned in surprise. "He said you were confident. Capable. That pressure never seemed to affect you." His smile slowly disappeared. "And then?" "He said he wished I had that kind of strength." The words settled heavily between us. "He probably never meant it the way I understood it," Levi said quickly. "I know that now. But back then, I couldn't stop hearing it. So I kept trying to become someone more like you." A quiet laugh escaped him. One completely devoid of happiness. I wasn't good at business. I hated conflict. I cried too easily. I could never become the son I thought he wanted. He lowered his head. So eventually, I convinced myself that I just wasn't enough. My heart ached. I kept thinking, if I couldn't become someone worth being proud of, then one day everyone would realize they made a mistake loving me. His voice trembled. What if my dad started regretting having me? What if my mom stopped needing me? What if everyone eventually left? The first tear slid silently down his cheek. I couldn't stay where I was any longer. I crossed the small distance between us and wrapped my arms around him. The moment I held him, his body shook, as though he'd been carrying those fears alone for years. I held him tighter. Levi. He buried his face against my shoulder. I've got you. He shook his head weakly. You don't understand. I gently cupped his face until he looked at me. His eyes were overflowing with tears. Then help me understand. His lips trembled. I think people only love what I represent. The Blackthorne heir. The son. The future. His breathing hitched. And one day, when they don't need that anymore, they'll realize, I'm useless. The word shattered something inside me. Useless. How could someone so gentle, so thoughtful, so kind, believe something so cruel about himself? I pulled him back into my arms, holding him as though I could somehow shield him from every terrible thought he'd ever believed. Don't. My voice cracked. Don't ever call yourself that again. He tried to protest, but I held him a little tighter. Listen to me. Your father doesn't love you because you're his heir. Your mother doesn't love you because of your name. Jesse doesn't. Adrian certainly doesn't. A faint smile tugged at my lips through the emotion. I don't think that man even knows how not to love you. A tiny, tearful laugh escaped Levi. I gently brushed the tears from his cheeks. And me? I looked directly into his eyes. I don't care about your family's company. I don't care about your name. I don't care how successful you are. I care about you. Just you. I rested a gentle kiss against his forehead. You are not loved because you're useful. You are loved because you're Levi. His eyes closed. More tears slipped free. But this time, he didn't hide them. For a long time, he simply cried quietly against my shoulder. And as I held him, only one thought remained in my mind. I would spend the rest of my life protecting him from anyone who made him believe he wasn't enough. Even if that person was himself. Something changed after that afternoon. Not overnight. Not dramatically. Just quietly. I became more attentive. Not controlling. Not overprotective. Simply more aware. I noticed when his smiles didn't quite reach his eyes. I noticed when he was forcing himself to eat. When he was tired. When he needed company but was too afraid to ask. And slowly, he stopped carrying everything by himself. He started telling me what was worrying him before those worries became fear. He reached for my hand without hesitation. He laughed without immediately apologizing for it. Our relationship didn't become stronger because of one emotional conversation. It became stronger because, from that day forward, we stopped pretending everything was fine. We trusted each other with the truth. And once all the masks disappeared, what remained between us was something quiet. Something steady. Something real. Something I knew, with absolute certainty, I never wanted to lose. For a little while, I almost forgot what chaos felt like. Life had settled into a rhythm I never knew I needed. Every morning, I'd leave the penthouse before the city had fully awakened. Every evening, instead of searching for another reason to stay at the office, I'd find myself looking forward to going home. The silence that had greeted me every night for years was gone. Now there was always something waiting for me. A light left on in the living room. A book lying open on the coffee table. Soft music drifting through the apartment. The quiet aroma of dinner lingering in the air. It amazed me how quickly those ordinary little things became the moments I treasured most. For the first time since my parents died, coming home actually felt like coming home. Unfortunately, peace had never lasted long in the Blackwood family. The trouble began in the boardroom. At first, it was subtle. Questions disguised as concern. Comments about my schedule. Suggestions that perhaps I was delegating more responsibilities than usual. I ignored them. Until those comments slowly became accusations. Then the Horizon Consortium announced its newest project. A multi-billion-dollar international development contract. Winning it would reshape the market. Losing it would strengthen our competitors for years to come. Every major corporation immediately entered the race. Including Blackwood Group. Including Blackthorne Group. From that moment on, the entire company revolved around a single objective. The contract. The board expected me to personally oversee every presentation. Every negotiation. Every strategic decision. Anything less, in their eyes, would be failure. Then my stepmother made her move. She waited until the room had fallen completely silent before speaking. Perhaps. Her voice was calm. Controlled. The company needs a leader who can devote his full attention to it. Nobody asked who she meant. Nobody needed to. She wanted her own son sitting in my chair. She had wanted it for years. This contract had simply given her the perfect opportunity. Several directors exchanged uneasy glances. Others chose to remain silent. Finally, the chairman spoke. No. His voice was firm. He looked directly at me. We still believe you are the right person to lead Blackwood Group. Relief barely had time to settle before he continued. But trust must be earned. You have one opportunity. Bring this contract to Blackwood Group. If you succeed, this discussion ends. If you fail? He never finished the sentence. He didn't have to. Everyone in the room already understood. After that meeting, my life no longer belonged to me. Every morning began before sunrise. Every night ended long after the rest of the city had fallen asleep. Business dinners replaced evenings at home. Strategy meetings replaced shared meals. Conference calls replaced quiet conversations by the river. My office slowly became the place where I spent more time than anywhere else. I kept convincing myself it was temporary. Just one project. One victory. Then everything would return to normal. But pressure has a way of following you home. The more exhausted I became at work, the shorter my patience grew everywhere else. One evening, after yet another 14-hour day, I returned to the penthouse with tomorrow's presentation still running through my mind. I barely noticed the untouched dinner waiting on the dining table. Barely noticed the silence. Until I realized. Someone had been waiting for me. Levi stood from the dining table the moment I walked in. I waited for you, he said softly. You missed dinner again. I was worried. Normally, I would have smiled. Normally, I would have apologized. But that night, all I could feel was exhaustion. I told you not to wait up. I wasn't hungry. Levi looked at me with quiet concern. You've barely been eating. And you've hardly been sleeping. I'm fine. No, you're not. His voice remained gentle. You don't have to carry everything by yourself. Something inside me snapped. For weeks, I'd been carrying the weight of the company on my shoulders. The board. The contract. My stepmother. The endless pressure. And in that moment, instead of seeing the person who was worried about me, I only heard one more problem demanding my attention. So now you're going to lecture me too? Levi's expression fell. I'm not trying to. If living with me is such a problem. The words left my mouth before I could stop them. Then maybe you should leave. The room fell completely silent. The color slowly drained from Levi's face. His eyes widened in disbelief. For several long seconds, neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. I knew immediately what I'd done. I hadn't meant it. Not for a single second. But it was too late. The words were already hanging between us. Sharp. Cruel. Impossible to take back. Levi lowered his eyes. I'm sorry. The quiet apology hurt far more than if he'd shouted at me. He wasn't angry. He thought he had done something wrong. The guilt hit me instantly. I took a step toward him. Levi, I didn't mean. But he gently shook his head. It's okay. His voice was barely a whisper. I understand. That somehow made it worse. The silence afterward was unbearable. I stood there, knowing exactly what I should do. I should apologize. I should stay. I should hold him and tell him none of this was his fault. Instead, overwhelmed by shame and frustration, I reached for my jacket and walked back out the door. The elevator doors closed behind me. Almost immediately, regret settled heavily in my chest. I promised myself I'd make things right after work tomorrow. I truly believed there was still time. There wasn't. When I returned that night, the penthouse was silent. The lights were off. The apartment felt painfully empty. My heart sank. Without stopping to think, I grabbed my keys and drove straight to Blackthorne Mansion. Before I even reached the front door, it opened. Adrian was already standing there. One look at his face told me everything. He knew. For one brief moment. I honestly thought he was going to throw me back down the front steps. Only Robert stepping calmly between us stopped that from happening. That's enough. His voice wasn't loud. But it carried enough authority to make Adrian reluctantly step aside. Robert looked at me quietly. Then spoke. Come inside. His study looked exactly as I remembered. Books filled every wall. The fireplace burned gently despite the warm evening. The familiar scent of old paper and cedar filled the room. Neither of us spoke while tea was served. Only after the door quietly closed behind the servant did Robert finally break the silence. What happened? I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. How could I possibly explain weeks of pressure? Months of expectations? Years of fear? In just a few sentences? Robert didn't rush me. He simply waited. Eventually, the words came. I told him everything. The Horizon Consortium. The board. My stepmother's attempt to replace me. The impossible ultimatum. The fear of becoming the man who destroyed everything my parents had built. When I finally finished, Robert simply nodded. I understand. I looked at him in surprise. He smiled sadly. More than you realize. He leaned back in his chair. When I first became chairman, I believed there were only two choices. Win. Or fall behind. So every single time life forced me to choose between my work and the people waiting for me at home, I chose work. A quiet laugh escaped him. I always told myself it was temporary. It never was. His eyes drifted toward an old family photograph resting on one of the shelves. I missed birthdays. I missed anniversaries. I missed ordinary family dinners. I missed quiet evenings that seemed completely insignificant at the time. His smile faded. And one day, I realized those ordinary evenings were the moments I wanted back the most. Silence settled between us. Then Robert looked directly into my eyes. Your father and I spent decades trying to outdo each other. In business. Neither of us truly won. A faint smile crossed his face. But Alexander defeated me somewhere far more important. He never stopped showing up for the people he loved. When his family needed him, he was there. When business demanded everything, he still found a way to protect what couldn't be replaced. Robert lowered his eyes for a moment. I spent years convincing myself that made him weaker. His voice grew quieter. I know better now. He looked back at me. Companies recover. Markets recover. Even reputations recover. He paused. But some moments, they never come back. His gaze never left mine. Don't spend your whole life protecting a legacy, only to wake up one day and realize you've lost the people that legacy was supposed to protect. The room fell silent once again. His words lingered long after he stopped speaking. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't thinking about the Horizon Consortium. I wasn't thinking about the board. I wasn't thinking about my stepmother. I was thinking about my father. And wondering whether somewhere along the way, I'd unknowingly started walking the same lonely road Robert had spent a lifetime regretting. That night, I quietly made my way to Levi's bedroom. The room was illuminated only by pale moonlight filtering through the curtains. Levi was already asleep, curled up on one side of the bed, one hand resting protectively over his growing stomach. For a long moment, I simply stood there, watching him. He looked so peaceful, so vulnerable. And all I could think about was the pain I'd caused him with a single sentence. Then maybe you should leave. Those words kept echoing in my head. Carefully, I slipped onto the empty side of the bed, making sure not to wake him. I didn't dare touch him. I didn't feel like I deserved to. I simply lay there, staring at the ceiling, wondering how someone who had promised to protect him had become the person who hurt him the most. Sometime during the night, exhaustion finally won. Without realizing it, I fell asleep beside him. Early the next morning, a loud shout jolted me awake. What are you doing here? Before I could even sit up, Levi shoved me away with surprising strength. Get out. His entire body was trembling. His eyes were swollen and red, as though he'd cried long after I'd left. Why are you still here? He shouted, tears already filling his eyes. I already left your apartment. You don't have to compromise your business anymore. You told me to leave. His voice broke. So why are you here now? Every word felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I didn't mean. You did. He cut me off. You said it. His breathing became uneven. If it wasn't for the babies. He placed a shaking hand over his stomach. You wouldn't even be here. You don't love me. You only came because they're your children. If I wasn't carrying them, you would have let me walk away. The tears he had been holding back finally spilled over. I knew it. I knew one day you'd get tired of me. I knew I'd become a burden. I knew I wasn't enough. Before he could say another word, I crossed the room and pulled him into my arms. He struggled immediately. Let me go. I don't want your pity. I'm sorry. My voice cracked. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Levi. I was exhausted. I was angry. But never at you. I should have never said those words. Never. He kept crying against my chest. I hurt you. I know I did. And I'll regret that for the rest of my life. I rested my forehead against his. His shoulders shook with quiet sobs. I don't expect you to forgive me. Not today. Not tomorrow. Maybe not for a long time. I gently brushed away his tears. I'll give you all the time you need. If you want to be angry, be angry. If you don't want to talk to me, I'll wait. If it takes months, I'll wait. If it takes years, I'll still be here. I won't leave again. Slowly, his struggles became weaker. He didn't hug me back. But he stopped trying to push me away. For now, that was enough. After speaking with Robert, I packed a small bag and moved into Blackthorne Mansion. Not because anyone forced me to. Because I wanted to. Every morning, before leaving for Blackwood Group, I'd make sure Levi had eaten breakfast, taken his medicine, and wasn't feeling unwell. Only then would I leave for work. Every evening, no matter how late the meetings ended, I'd come straight back to the mansion. Levi never asked me to. I simply did. He still barely spoke to me. Sometimes, when I entered the room, he'd quietly look at me for a few seconds, then turn away. At night, he'd lie on the edge of the bed with his back facing me, leaving as much distance between us as possible. I never complained. After turning off the lights, I'd quietly move a little closer and gently wrap one arm around his waist from behind. Not to force him to forgive me, just to let him know I was still there. Some nights, he'd carefully remove my hand. Other nights, he'd leave it where it was. Those tiny moments became the only hope I had. Days turned into weeks. I never stopped apologizing. Not with grand speeches, but through small things. Making sure he ate, driving him to every appointment, holding an umbrella over him when it rained, helping him when his back hurt, sitting beside him during sleepless nights, loving him quietly, even when he couldn't bring himself to love me back the same way. Then one afternoon, everything changed. Levi was sitting in the garden when I joined him. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, he looked at me. Really looked at me. If you ever tell me to leave again, his voice trembled. If you ever make me feel like I don't belong beside you again. Tears gathered in his eyes. I don't think my heart will survive it a second time. My chest tightened. I gently cupped his face in both hands. I'm so sorry. I'll spend the rest of my life making up for that one sentence. I leaned forward and placed a soft kiss on his forehead. I promise you, no matter what happens, no matter how difficult life becomes, I will never tell you to leave again. My home is wherever you are. And if I ever forget what's truly important, I expect you to remind me. Levi stared at me for several long seconds. Then, for the first time since that terrible night, he reached up and wrapped his arms around me. I forgive you, he whispered through tears. But don't ever break my heart like that again. I closed my eyes and held him as tightly as I dared. Never again. This time, it wasn't just a promise. It was a vow. A few days later, everything changed. The final presentation to the Horizon Consortium lasted nearly 4 hours. Months of preparation. Countless sleepless nights. Every sacrifice had led to that single meeting. By the time I stepped out of the conference room, all I could do was wait. The phone call came just after noon. Congratulations, Mr. Blackwood. The board of the Horizon Consortium has unanimously selected Blackwood Group to lead the project. For a moment, I simply stood there. I had won. The contract that everyone had been fighting for was ours. A laugh escaped me before I could stop it. The first person I thought about wasn't the board. It wasn't the shareholders. It wasn't the media. It was Levi. Without a second thought, I called him. The phone rang twice before he answered. Hello? I couldn't stop smiling. We got it. There was a brief silence. Then, we won the Horizon project. On the other end of the line, I heard him gasp. You really did? We did. I'm so proud of you. Those 5 words meant more than the contract itself. I closed my eyes and smiled. I'll be home soon. I'll be waiting. The celebration at Blackwood Group began the moment I returned. The boardroom that had once questioned me was now filled with applause. Several directors stood to shake my hand. One after another, they congratulated me. Even the chairman smiled. I told everyone they were wrong to doubt you. We believed you would prove yourself. And you did. One by one, the directors echoed the same sentiment. Congratulations, Mr. Blackwood. Outstanding work. You've made your parents proud. Even my stepmother remained silent. For the first time in a long while, she had nothing to say. That evening, instead of attending another celebration dinner, I went home. Blackthorne Mansion welcomed me with the comforting sound of laughter drifting from the dining room. Levi smiled the moment I walked inside. Before anyone else could say a word, he quietly walked over and wrapped his arms around me. I'm proud of you. He whispered the words against my shoulder. I hugged him gently, careful of his growing belly. Thank you. After dinner, Robert asked me to join him in his study. He poured 2 cups of tea before handing one to me. For a while, neither of us spoke. Finally, he smiled. Congratulations. Thank you. You earned it. I lowered my eyes. I know this project meant a great deal to Blackthorne Group too. It did. He nodded without hesitation. But do you know something? He looked at me with the same calm smile. Not for a single second do I regret losing that contract. I looked at him in surprise. He chuckled softly. If Blackthorne Group had to lose, I'm glad we lost to Lucian Blackwood. His expression became warm. Because I know exactly what kind of man you are. You'll win fairly. You'll honor your commitments. And you'll never forget the people standing beside you. He leaned back in his chair. Years ago, I respected Alexander Blackwood as my greatest rival. A proud smile appeared on his face. Today, I respect his son just as much. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Robert stood and held out his hand. I'm proud of you, Lucian. I looked at his hand for only a second before taking it. Thank you. He gave my shoulder a firm squeeze. Welcome to the family. For the first time, those words didn't feel symbolic. They felt real. And somehow, hearing them from the man who had once been my father's greatest rival, meant more than winning the Horizon contract ever could. The very next morning, after breakfast, I found Levi sitting in the mansion's garden, a book resting unopened in his lap. The morning breeze gently played with his hair as he looked up at me. I smiled. Can we go home today? He blinked. Home? My penthouse. I walked closer before kneeling beside him. I know everyone here loves you. They've taken wonderful care of you. But, I gently took his hand. I miss our home. I miss living only with you. I miss our balcony. I miss our quiet dinners. I miss us. For a second, Levi simply stared at me. Then the most beautiful smile spread across his face. I've been waiting for you to ask. My heart skipped a beat. You have? He nodded. I didn't want to leave without you asking me to come home. His fingers intertwined with mine. So, when do we leave? I laughed softly. Right now. That evening, we returned to the penthouse together. Walking through the front door somehow felt different. The apartment no longer felt empty. It felt complete. The staff welcomed Levi back warmly before quietly giving us our privacy. After dinner, we stepped out onto the balcony. The city glittered beneath us, thousands of lights stretching across the skyline. Levi sat sideways on my lap, comfortably resting against my chest while I wrapped both arms carefully around him, my hands naturally settling over his now much larger belly. Neither of us spoke for a while. We simply enjoyed the cool evening air. Then Levi laughed quietly. You know, I love my family. They're everything to me. I kissed his shoulder. I know. But, he looked out across the city. Blackthorne Mansion is exhausting. I couldn't help smiling. It is? He nodded dramatically. They don't let me do anything. If I stand up, my mother tells me to sit. If I sit too long, Jessie tells me to walk. If I walk too much, Adrian appears out of nowhere and tells me to rest. I laughed. And my father? He watches all of it without saying anything. Until I don't eat enough. Then suddenly he joins them. His cheeks puffed out adorably. I swear, they don't even let me breathe properly. I buried my face against his shoulder, laughing quietly. And here? Levi relaxed completely against me. Here, everything feels peaceful. I can breathe. I can laugh. I can just be Levi. His words settled warmly inside my heart. I kissed his shoulder again before resting my forehead against his. You don't have to go anywhere else. I whispered. I won't let anyone take you away from me again. And I won't let my work come between us ever again. He smiled. I know. That same week, I turned 30. I hadn't planned any celebration. A quiet dinner with Levi would have been more than enough. But somehow, the Blackthorne family had other plans. That evening, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, Robert, Mrs. Blackthorne, Jessie and Adrian and their 9-year-old son were standing outside. Mrs. Blackthorne carefully held a beautifully decorated homemade cake. She looked almost embarrassed. I made it. She cleared her throat. I'm not very good at buying gifts. So, I thought I'd bake one instead. For a moment, I simply stared at her. I couldn't help remembering the first day we'd met. Back then, she had looked at me as though I was the greatest threat her son had ever faced. Now, she had spent hours baking me a birthday cake. A smile slowly spread across my face. Thank you. I don't think anyone's ever baked me a birthday cake before. Her expression softened immediately. Then we'll have to make up for all the birthdays you missed. The evening was filled with laughter. Jesse insisted on taking photographs. Adrian secretly ate 3 slices of cake despite insisting he wasn't interested in dessert. Robert spent half the evening teasing him about it. Even Levi laughed until tears gathered in the corners of his eyes. Watching him laugh so freely made every difficult day worth it. Late that night, after everyone had gone home, Levi and I stood alone on the balcony once again. He leaned comfortably against my chest while I wrapped my arms around him from behind. The city was quiet. So? He smiled. 30. I feel old. I laughed. You are old. He gasped dramatically before lightly elbowing me. I chuckled and kissed the side of his head. Then my smile slowly faded into something softer. I've been thinking. When my parents died, I honestly believed I'd lost my family forever. I tightened my arms around him. But somehow, I found another one. I looked toward the lights of Blackthorne Mansion in the distance. My father's greatest rival ended up becoming the man who treated me like a son. The woman who once thought I'd hurt the person she loved most baked me my very first birthday cake. Jessie worries about me almost as much as she worries about you. And Adrian. I laughed quietly. I think he's finally decided not to throw me out the front door. Levi giggled. That's his way of saying he likes you. I smiled. Maybe. I rested my chin gently on his shoulder. I couldn't be more grateful. Life has a strange way of surprising people. I spent years believing the Blackthorne family were my enemies. But somewhere along the way, they became my home too. Levi turned his head just enough to meet my eyes. You've always been part of this family, he whispered. You just didn't know it yet. I leaned forward and kissed him softly. As I held him beneath the stars, I realized something. The greatest thing I'd gained that year wasn't the Horizon contract. It wasn't another business victory. It wasn't even becoming a father. It was finding a family in Levi. In the last place I'd ever expected to look. The weeks that followed passed far too quickly. As Levi's pregnancy progressed, the twins grew stronger. But so did the strain on his body. Walking became difficult. Simple things, standing for too long, climbing a few steps, even turning over in bed, left him breathless. The smile he wore for everyone else became harder to maintain. Some nights, he couldn't sleep because of the constant discomfort. Other nights, he woke from the pain, quietly trying not to wake me. He never succeeded. The moment I felt him move beside me, I was already awake. Helping him sit up. Bringing him water. Rubbing his aching back. Holding him until he finally drifted back to sleep. Watching him struggle while knowing I couldn't take that pain away was one of the hardest things I'd ever experienced. Eventually, I stopped pretending I could balance everything. The Horizon project had officially begun, and my executives were more than capable of handling the day-to-day operations. For the first time since becoming CEO, I stepped back. I handed over my responsibilities temporarily and took leave from work. Some directors questioned my decision. I didn't care. There would always be another meeting. Another contract. Another business opportunity. There would never be another chance to experience these final weeks beside Levi. So I stayed with him. Every appointment. Every meal. Every sleepless night. Every laugh. Every tear. I stayed. Exactly as I'd promised. At 35 weeks, everything changed. It began just after midnight. Levi suddenly clutched his stomach, his face turning pale. Lucian. His voice shook. Something's wrong. Panic flooded through me. Within minutes, we were racing toward the hospital. Robert and Mrs. Blackthorne arrived only moments after we did. Jesse stayed beside Levi while the doctors examined him. Adrian paced endlessly outside the room, unable to stand still. The doctors worked quickly. After what felt like an eternity, one of them finally came out. We need to perform an emergency cesarean section. There isn't any more time. The world around me seemed to disappear. I signed every consent form they placed in front of me without even reading them. All I wanted was for Levi to come back to me. The surgery lasted hours. The longest hours of my life. No one spoke much. Mrs. Blackthorne quietly cried into Robert's shoulder. Jessie sat with her hands clasped together, whispering prayer after prayer. Even Adrian, the man who always seemed fearless, couldn't hide the worry in his eyes. Then, the operating room doors finally opened. The doctor's expression was exhausted. The babies are here. Relief washed over me. Before it disappeared just as quickly. They're both in the neonatal intensive care unit. And Levi's condition is still critical. My knees nearly gave out beneath me. For the next several days, time lost all meaning. Levi remained under constant observation. Our daughters were surrounded by tiny tubes and monitors far too large for bodies so impossibly small. Every beep from a machine made my heart stop. Every conversation with a doctor left me terrified. Those were the longest days of my life. None of us left the hospital. Robert practically moved into the waiting room. Mrs. Blackthorne refused to go home until Levi opened his eyes. Jessie spent every waking hour helping however she could. Adrian quietly stood guard outside the intensive care unit as though sheer determination alone could protect the people inside. We all held on. Together. And slowly, little by little, things began to change. Levi opened his eyes. A few days later, he smiled. One of our daughters finally breathed without assistance. Then the other. Each tiny improvement felt like a miracle. Every day, they grew stronger. And with them, so did we. Several weeks later, we finally brought them home. Home. The word had never sounded so beautiful. The penthouse that had once felt far too quiet was now filled with tiny cries. Tiny yawns. Tiny fingers wrapping around ours. And two beautiful little girls who somehow managed to fill every corner of our lives with happiness. Now, months later, the crying had slowly been replaced by something even better. Little giggles. Curious eyes. And the funniest little sounds they made with their tiny mouths whenever they were trying to get our attention. Levi insisted they were trying to talk. I argued they were just demanding more attention. Neither of us truly cared who was right. We could spend hours simply sitting together on the living room floor, watching them discover the world one tiny expression at a time. Sometimes they'd stare at each other. Sometimes they'd reach for our fingers. Sometimes they'd make those strange little noises that sent both of us into helpless laughter. Every single moment felt priceless. One evening, as the sunset painted the apartment in warm shades of gold, Levi rested against my shoulder while both of our daughters slept peacefully in our arms. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. I looked at the family we'd created together. At the man I'd fallen in love with. At our daughters. At the life that had begun with one unexpected night in Switzerland. If someone had told me back then that my greatest rival's son would become the love of my life, that his family would become my own, that the home I'd spent years searching for would be found in his embrace, I never would have believed them. Yet here we were. Complete. Happy. Together. And in that quiet moment, as Levi intertwined his fingers with mine and our daughters slept peacefully between us, I finally understood something my father and Robert had learned long before me. Success isn't measured by the company you build, or the contracts you win. It's measured by the people waiting for you when you come home. And as I looked at the three people who had become my entire world, I knew without a doubt, I was the richest man alive.